Here we are during these pandemic times. Our teachers, educators, parents, and caregivers alike are having to take on different roles and doing such an amazing job of taking on far more than seems possible. So I just want to say thank you so much for taking this opportunity with us today, as well as exploring ways as we connect around food during COVID with nutrition education, home and school learning opportunities. And my name is Nicole Spencer. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and hers. As a public health dietitian with Vancouver Coastal Health, I get the privilege of working with school staff and educators, health professionals, and community partners to build capacity for supporting healthy eating for children and youth in Vancouver. And I'd now like to hand it over to Amelia.
Thanks, Nicole. Can you hear me? Oh.
Yes.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I'm just going to mute myself.
Perfect. Hi, my name is Amelia Maleshkova. My preferred pronouns are she, hers, and hers. I am a population health dietitian with Northern Health Authority and the school age nutrition lead. Similarly to Nicole, I work with community partners to promote healthy eating for school age children. F2SBC is my home, but my role is regional. So I work to support communities all across the Northern Health Authority region. Okay, so the plan for this webinar is to explore roles and approaches in food and nutrition education. We know that there are no shortages of lesson plans on this topic, and lots of these have been recently adapted for the home learning as well as the classroom. So we're going to be spending some time identifying child-centered nutrition education opportunities. Vancouver Coastal Health has created a wonderful list of lesson plans, resources, and tools that Nicole will be sharing with you for some inspiration. So I'd like to start by asking you to reflect on a question. So if you could please go back to Menti again and enter this new code. The code is 359677. And we want to know what influences your food choices. And I invite you to think about all parts of your life at work, with your friends and family, and how you spend time at home or you spend time in the weekends. So we're looking for 1 to 2 word answers. And if you're watching this webinar recording, we encourage you to jot down your answers as well. Nicole, do we have the slide or should I?
There are oh, here we go. It wasn't coming up. So that's why I was like, okay. I'm not going to show nothing. And now all of a sudden we have a bunch. I think everyone sort of just did it around the same time. There we go.
There's a bit of a lag. That's okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. I was like, oh no.
You need some time to think and reflect.
Right? Oh, for sure.
Yeah. We're sometimes uncomfortable with silence, and I think that needs to change. Great. So lots of different breadth of responses there.
All right. I think that's all we've got there. That's probably it now. Okay. Oh, one more.
So availability, yeah, all these different things. Great. Okay, so I think we can move on to, the next slide. So thank you for answering and reflecting on that question. We've asked this question to just really illustrate how complex and deeply personal eating is. We choose the foods we do based on taste and what we can afford and what's available in our communities, the foods that we know how to prepare, that we grew up with, or that connect us with a fond memory. When it comes to what influences food choices, nutrition may be a consideration, but tends to fall at the bottom of the list. That's because food is so much more than nutrients. It's about relationships, culture, pleasure, and emotions. And that's playing out right now in some positive and not so positive ways during this pandemic. I learned this firsthand as a newly minted dietitian working in First Nations communities. I had suggested to some of my clients to try oatmeal for breakfast as a cheap and nourishing option. I later learned that some of these clients were survivors of residential schools and had memories of being forced to eat bowls of oatmeal, which sometimes had maggots in them. I failed to ask whether they actually enjoyed oatmeal or to account for a traumatic life experience. By just focusing on that one piece nutrition, we miss a much larger complex picture of what food really means to people. So children are hopefully not having to think about things like cost, but similarly, they're more likely to eat foods that taste good, that they're familiar with, that they've been regularly exposed to at home and at school, or that are culturally important to their families. And that's why child-centered nutrition education is about food, not nutrients or nutrition.
Sorry, the slide. Oh, there we go.
So child-centered nutrition education is at its core about food education. We cannot effectively teach children to eat healthy through words, theories, or abstract nutrition lectures. Children learn best by doing, and when they can engage their senses and curiosity. Food is real, it's tangible. Connecting children with food in this way can truly make a difference. A child-centered approach helps children feel good about food eating in their bodies and gives them the experiences and skills they need to eat well in the long run. I love this picture from Janet from the Rainbow Plate, and in her presentation, she reminds us that we need to bring joy to all foods and all food experiences without vilifying any foods. So this includes carrots and spinach and berries, but also cookies, chips, and cake. So I know that many of you are wearing many hats, and now more than ever, and it's a bit of a jumbled time with students learning from home and now the optional transition back to school. And the good news is there are defined roles in food education for adults and for students that can help us set the stage for a positive learning experience. Students at this age group rely on parents and caregivers and guardians to make major decisions about food. So the goal is to not have students share the parent's job in feeding. Rather, the role of educators is to provide students with lots of neutral opportunities to explore and experience a variety of foods in a pressure-free environment. So if you're offering food as part of education, students get to decide whether to try a food and how much to eat. So this means no one-bite rules or mandatory exploration bites. Letting children learn at their own pace and own this part of their food experience is more likely to result in them enjoying a variety of foods on their own in the long run. You might notice that this is a nod to Ellen Satter's Division of Responsibility in Feeding, which outlines adults' roles in feeding and children's roles in eating, and it's a foundational approach. If you want to learn more, we explore this in detail and how it applies to the school setting in our last webinar in January. And it's also covered in the Nurture Healthy Eaters handout, which are both linked on this slide. So now I'd like to play a quick 1-minute video that does a really nice job at showing the roles of food education in action at home.
1, 2, 3, bon appétit.
No, I don't want apple.
You don't want apple? Okay, oops. Maya, would you like some apple?
Yes.
Okay, here you can use my spoon.
Okay, they can eat it.
Ah. Let's see.
Only the one more cinnamon. Some less cinnamon. I need more cinnamon. There's not enough cinnamon.
Okay.
It's not true.
No, it's not true. That might be a little dry. Oh my.
I know.
So you may have recognized that was Nicole and her family in that video, and that was a video she entered in the Better Together Kitchen Hacks contest, which is an annual contest that promotes eating and cooking together, and it usually runs between April and May every year. And Nicole says she's not techie, but I think that video speaks otherwise. And so now I'll hand it over to Nicole.
All right, am I muted? No, I'm not. Great. Oh, well, now that you've all seen me in my pajamas, so funny after doing that, making that video, it was a really opportunity for me to recognize that my manners were worse than I thought. And I now know where my youngest gets them from. So I have some work to do. But anyway, okay. So we're going to head back to Menti, we'd like to provide this opportunity for you all to reflect on some of the theory that we've sort of just spoken to and with some of these questions. So you can head back, and the code, it's the same code as before, so it should be hopefully pretty easy to get there. And there's 6 questions or 6 statements. I think they're all, well, there's 1 question, the rest are statements. And we just invite you to reflect on whether that comes across as an opportunity to use a child-centered approach or a child-centered language when it comes to food education. And certainly if you can't access Menti or you're watching this as a recording, we still encourage you to jot down your answers. I'll just give it a minute to get a few responses in. Okay, I think we'll head there, and hopefully shows up. So we've got, it's kind of hard to read. Most people think, yes, this apple is green. What other fruit and vegetables are green? And some eating different foods gives us what we need to grow and be active. And also carrots are good for us because they help our eyes stay healthy. And also one food draw, a healthy meal with a quarter of your plate, half your plate with vegetables and fruit, a quarter protein and a quarter grains. Anyone else want to have last opportunity to weigh in? All right, I'll get back here. So we sort of see 2 questions as that was reflected in the responses. Yeah, we sort of agree with those 2 that had the most responses that really speak to kind of what we're aiming for. First, let's use positive and inclusive language. Eating different foods gives us what we need to grow and be active. Especially with the youngest students, this framing allows us to talk about food in a simple, positive, and neutral way, regardless of whether any child hasn't learned to enjoy a particular food yet or doesn't have access to a particular food at home. And 2, let's inspire inquiry and exploration. Yes, this apple is green. What other fruit and vegetables are green? And we're talking about an apple because it's one of the more readily affordable and accessible fruits in BC. Then when we allow inquiry using experience and identification with foods that children may have already eaten or be exposed to, that really helps. I have a story that relates to this. Years ago, I was working up in Haida Gwaii, and I had my first opportunity to do some nutrition education in a kindergarten class, and I really had no idea what to do. And I talked to my very brilliant and experienced public health colleague, and she said, just bring in some sort of really simple, basic food, maybe like, you know, an apple or an orange or something like that, and ask them questions about it and reflect on it. Well, I wanted it to be special and memorable, so I didn't totally take her advice, and I chose a tangelo to bring in, which is sort of a mix between kind of like a mandarin orange and a grapefruit. I think it has like a nubbly bit on top. Anyway, I went into the class and I asked all these questions. You know, what shape is it? Is it soft, smooth, or is it rough? Where do you think it's grown? What color do you think it is? And then the big reveal. I said, so what is it? I said, an orange, sort of around the room. And then it's like, no, it's a tangelo. And then it was sort of like silence. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with that, or I don't think it was harmful, but it was sort of a missed opportunity, because if I had said, that's right, it's an orange, and it could be, you know, how have you eaten it before? What was it like? What other fruits and vegetables are orange? And there's just been a little bit more of an opportunity. And then, you know, and also to go home and say, hey, you know, we had orange today, rather than, hey, we had tangelo today. And everyone's like, where do I get that? Is that even in the grocery store? So Anyway, we're going to explore many more opportunities to apply these concepts, but first let's unpack the Menti questions that maybe have the opportunity to be reframed. So labeling. Labeling food is so common in our culture. There's no end to opinions about what is healthy, what isn't healthy. It's so complicated and can be very stressful for us as adults. So we have an opportunity to frame it differently for children. And of course, we have the best of intentions. We want to provide children with the skills to eat well. But if we add judgments about food with framing of sometimes and everyday and unprocessed, or, ultra-processed and processed, and even red light, yellow light, green light foods, the result can be, are my parents choosing bad foods for me? Am I bad for eating these foods? And that can be triggering for a child to feel shame and guilt around food, especially with younger children, when they usually have little control over what foods are available to them and they really think in black and white. And regardless of food access, thinking that a food is unhealthy can lead them to become preoccupied with these foods and want more of them in the long run. So as we discussed earlier, messages such as we eat different foods to get what we need to grow and be active, as well as all foods can fit, are more inclusive framing. Let's nurture curiosity instead. How does it taste, the flavor, the texture? Food can bring such pleasure, so let's promote positive relationships with all food and use exploration as our teaching tool to have the lasting impact instead of our chosen labels for them. As well, when we think about nutrition information can feel like pressure. It can. Carrots are good for us because they help our eyes stay healthy. Vegetables and fruits are growing foods is another example of something similar. Well, what if they haven't learned to enjoy carrots yet? Oh no, are my eyes not going to be healthy if I don't eat carrots? And do only vegetables and fruit help me grow? All children are different. For some, it's not a big deal, but for others, providing health-focused attributes connected to eating can lead them to feel more negatively about those foods in the long run. And as Amelia mentioned, with the roles we play in food education, allowing children to learn to enjoy foods at their own pace can have a much stronger lasting impact. Even as an adult, I can actually relate to this. When I first met my partner, I learned quite quickly about his love of kimchi, which, if you haven't heard of it, is fermented spicy vegetables, often cabbage and green onion. And he kept telling me how great it was. I should try it. It's fermented and it's vegetables. It's good for you. I didn't like the smell of it and I didn't really want to try it. And I did because he wanted me to, and I remember really hating it. Fast forward to today, years later, and I eat kimchi almost daily. I love that it's crunchy and sour and it adds color to my plate. But there were years in between when I felt pressured to taste it, and then there were years in between for when I felt pressured to taste it, and then when I finally did learn to enjoy it. And I think that was because he gave up talking about it. It just became a food that was neutrally on our table like anything else, and it sort of snuck up on me and our kids. But it probably took me longer to enjoy it because of that initial framing about why it was good for me and how much he wanted me to love it. So to the last Menti statement, draw a healthy meal with half your plate vegetables and fruit, a quarter protein, and a quarter grains. Another common food activity is asking students to track their food intake, and with the goal of understanding whether they're eating the right foods in the right amounts. Again, when we think about the roles that adults and children have in food education that Amelia mentioned at the beginning, it's really up to the child to trust their internal body cues to determine how much to eat of the foods being explored at a given meal from within what is available to them. We brought up this concept because it's a common activity, but we're not going to flush it out too much here. If you're interested in learning more about the roles of adults and children in feeding, feel free to check out the webinar that we offered back in January, which is linked to in slide 8. So by exploring a variety of foods, we have an opportunity to reframe these messages to give us a better chance of reaching the outcomes that we want. And I'm going to turn it back to Amelia to provide some examples of reframing.
Thanks, Nicole. So what do we do instead? We can focus on creating positive experiences that help to shape food acceptance and preferences in the long run. Food is such a wonderful tool to spark and nurture curiosity. We can get kids curious and excited about how it grows, how it looks like, feels like, where it comes from. For example, do you know where beans grow? Let's discover it together. Or do you know what this is? What shape is it? How does it feel? Smooth or fuzzy? How does it taste? Sweet, bitter, or fresh? Do you know where yogurt is invented? Funny story is that my mom told me that yogurt was invented in Bulgaria, which is why one of the bacterial strains used to make it is actually called Lactobacillus bulgaricus. And my family's from Bulgaria, and growing up, we never used to have milk at the table like other families. We would always have this yogurt drink my mom would make. She would mix plain yogurt and water. And to this day, I've had a really special connection to yogurt because of that. And finally, the relationship between food and our bodies. And this is a huge topic we don't have time to dive into today. But what I can say is that we can approach teaching kids about body diversity from a place of curiosity and celebration, as opposed to messages that reinforce diet culture and connect food with body size or weight. We can teach kids that bodies come in all different shapes and sizes, and that all bodies are good bodies. We can also create positive food experiences by building food skills. Involving kids with preparing and cooking helps teach food skills and builds confidence with trying new foods. It shows them that they can make tasty meals with simple ingredients and helps them feel confident that one day they can do the same. Even young kids can help with simple tasks like scrubbing potatoes, tossing a salad, or helping to set a table. If hands-on food experiences are not available to you, and this may be the case for those of you that work in the school setting, we can also engage students by asking questions about how a certain food may be eaten or prepared. For example, have you ever tried lentils before? How did you eat them? Or today we're exploring cereal. Muesli is a kind of cereal. It means mixture. What foods can you put in your muesli? Older students in grade 6 and up can start to understand and benefit from the concepts of balance to support meal planning skills. We can do this by connecting to the food groups from Canada's, or the food groupings from Canada's Food Guide. That's our national food guidelines. We can invite students to think about how they might build a balanced meal, one that includes all 3 food groupings, or a balanced snack with at least 1 food grouping. Their creation can be inclusive, but is not limited to the foods in Canada's Food Guide. Even our national guidelines recognize the importance of choosing foods based on enjoyment, culture, and tradition. Another fun activity could be to get students to design a restaurant menu with meals that include food groupings from Canada's Food Guide, as well as other foods that they enjoy. And finally, classifying a food group of foods neutrally. There are so many ways we can classify foods that nurture curiosity and teach about variety. Young kids can classify based on color, shape, texture, and where it grows. For example, what foods grow on trees, or what foods grow in the ground. Yes, this is a cranberry. What other types of berries can you name? At about grade 2, children can also start to classify foods in the 3 food groupings neutrally without labeling attributes. So for example, we can ask students to make a collage of the foods from the protein food groups. In older primary grades, the focus still remains on experiential learning and reinforcing variety. But starting at about grade 6, we can sprinkle in some nutrition messages about quality. We can say, whole grains are high in fiber and help keep us regular. What type of whole grains can you think of? Notice that it's not about saying whole grain is better than white bread. We're providing information in a neutral way and then bringing it back to something more concrete. The opportunities to explore, experience, or think about ways to prepare and eat these foods, which is ultimately what influences food acceptance and eating behaviors. Even when we're connecting to nutrients, we're focusing on what this food gives our body now, today. It gives us fiber and keeps us regular. We're not talking about decreasing risk or diabetes or heart disease or any other chronic disease. We know that disease is influenced by many factors, and it doesn't act to support child-focused nutrition education. So what about other foods that are not in the food groupings? Foods not in the food groupings are still food, and we can tell children that all food provides us with energy, because that's true. Food can also be celebrated for other aspects, like taste, flavor, the role they play in culture and tradition. As Nicole mentioned earlier, we want to talk about these foods neutrally without labeling them as treat foods or sometimes foods. And so now we'll hand it back over to Nicole.
Thanks so much, Amelia. So basically, I want to recognize that, there we have lots of lesson plans and resources out there. And I think one of the strongest elements that make it so powerful is that ability to connect around food, because one of the strongest predictors of health is our ability to connect with others. So yeah, how can we connect around food during these really challenging times? So we have a web page of Vancouver Coastal Health Supporting Healthy Eating at School that now has a section on connecting around food during COVID. And at the top of that section is this curated list titled Exploring Food, COVID-19, Home Learning Lesson Plans and Resources. And it's changing almost daily now because as I find, or we find out about new things, but all the resources we have to share are hyperlinked right into the graphics, unless I say that otherwise. So some supportive and inclusive lesson plans and resources we have here in BC. There are a few examples here that explore food from BC Egg in the Classroom and the dietitians at BC Dairy Association. I know there are various read aloud story options out there right now, and from the Vancouver Public Library, and of course within teachers creating for themselves. But what I've hyperlinked to here with Alex's First Seed is a story all about how plants grow. I just think it's a really lovely one. And on the right, it's an example of a food riddle. There are many types of this food, wild, brown, and white to name a few. Before it ever reached your plate, a paddy field is where it grew. Also on the right is a link to the BC at the Table videos and teacher guide for grade 6 or 7 and higher, and through which students can learn more about the food system and where food comes from in BC. There's also a teacher guide that provides cross-curricular connections for the students. And the 2 hyperlinks at the bottom, they include reference to these 3 resources, as well as lesson plans that connect to exploring food using inquiry and exploration for K-12. And I know the dietitians at BC Dairy Association have been also offering virtual workshops to provide for a home learning workshops for exploring food at home. So that's, I think, been really helpful for a lot of teachers from them. And also some BC content. Dash BC has curated lists of resources for at home. 2 I've highlighted here are the pocket plants, which are lovely videos that explore how to grow a plant without needing access to a garden space, and that can even be done by using the seeds from a tomato plant. On the right are 2 resources from Project Chef, who are fabulous and usually in the classrooms teaching food skills, but they've worked really hard to design home learning content that provides tips for cooking, along with reflective questions that connect back to the curriculum, as well as a knife skills video. So those are both hyperlinked there. So with BC Egg in the Classroom, the dietitians at BC Dairy, Dash BC, and Project Chef, I feel very fortunate to these local organizations and others for stepping up and providing positive and supportive food education opportunities. But this last photo and links include a wonderful 15-minute lesson plan and 2 supporting worksheets developed by a dietitian for her son's grade 4 class during this time of home learning. I just found out about it yesterday, so it's not on our list, but I love it because it focuses on food and explores the different kinds of food that comes from plants and invites students to look around their kitchen to find foods that come from plants that they may have. And anyway, it's really well done. And so if that's not on the resource yet, so if you're interested in that one, refer back to this slide 19. Anyway, so some of the resources that we previously mentioned could also be used by parents and caregivers right now, for sure, especially with younger children, given that most learning is currently happening at home. However, these 4 articles were written specifically for families during COVID. 3 Tips for Feeding Kids provides considerations for how to create a structure that can take the pressure off right now. Kids in the Kitchen provides some tips for cooking with kids and includes another link from Project Chef. The link on the right is hot off the presses. Amelia co-authored this, and it's some simple ideas for how to grow foods with kids at home. It is now on the website. In the middle, the top 5 questions is more general, but speaks to some hot topics such as planning around food during times of limited food availability, like now can be, food safety, and even using comfort foods. So even though these articles aren't explicitly home learning content, there's ample cross-curricular opportunities there. And lastly, I don't have them mentioned in here, but in some of the links, both in the home learning resource for teachers I mentioned on slide 17, and in the 3 Tips for Feeding Kids, there is content relating to media literacy, body diversity, and supporting mental health. So I'll turn it back to Amelia to wrap it up for us. And Amelia, you might be on mute if you're speaking. Amelia, you're muted if you're speaking right now. Maybe while she's figuring that out, I can wrap us up. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry, could you hear me?
Oh, now we can. You were muted. Okay. Start again.
Okay, sorry.
Gotta love technology.
Okay, so just again, just to thank you for being with us here today. I know it's a busy time, and these webinars are always a bit of a whirlwind. we hope that you feel inspired exploring some of these approaches and activities with the children and students in your life, and that we've shown how nutrition education doesn't have to be stressful, and in fact it should be joyful. It should be about exploration and helping kids feel positively about eating and their bodies. And certainly I guess,
Yeah, and so thanks, Amelia. I so appreciate everyone taking the time as well. And we certainly want to be able to take any questions that anyone might have, and comments. And I think that people can enter in the chat, and Addie can help us with that. I also wanted to give you the opportunity to head back to Menti, and now or even at the end after the questions and discussion. We'd just love to know if there's something that you'll take away after what we've shared, or and so you can please head in there, and it's really interesting for us to see. And if you are watching this as a recording, or if you're not able to go into Menti, please just write it down or enter in the chat box. That'd be great. So it'll stay up, and in the meantime, we'll head to Addie. Do we have any questions or comments at this point?
Yeah, there was a few kind of cool ideas actually.
Well,
Melanie shared that a colleague of hers offered a cafe type program at our Strong Start. They also had music pairing, so they would play a certain type of music while they made a recipe in the kitchen with the kids, which sounds like a really fun idea.
Oh, what a fun idea. Addie, you're a bit quiet, Addie. It's hard to hear you. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I can try. Is this better?
A little bit. Thanks.
Okay. I'll talk louder. My headphones might be dampening me a little bit. And Kelly was wondering, isn't protein food grouping abstract?
That's a great question. It's sort of funny because when it comes to food education and tying it back to food, sorry, I realize I'm not even sharing my video. Certainly protein is a nutrient. It's not a food in itself, and the protein foods grouping has so many more nutrients than just protein. And but you know, it can be sort of easier for adults. We often use that language. Oh, I want to get a protein and a starch and grain or vegetables and fruit. But so for children, I mean, I think that's partly why we're talking about how it's sort of the classification is fairly neutral. Like we eat different foods to get what we need, and we have these 3 groupings in Canada's Food Guide. And if we enjoy a variety of foods from these groupings, the idea is that we'll get what we need to grow and be active. But yeah, the protein itself is a bit of an abstract concept, which is why, again, we encourage people to tie it back to food for sure.
Okay. Cool.
Can you hear me? I can.
Yeah.
I don't really know how my video isn't showing up, is it? Or can you see me?
It is. Yeah.
Oh, it is? Okay. I don't. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So I think that's a really good question. Just a few things to add. We used our previous version of the Canada's Food Guide had food-based food groups. Like we had the 4 different food groups: the grains, the fruit and vegetable, meat and alternatives, and milk and alternatives. So that was a little easier in terms of them being food-based. And of course, now our new food guide has switched to the 3 food groupings, and 2 of them are food-based and 1 of them are technically a nutrient. We talked about how kids can start classifying based on food groups neutrally, like usually, you know, in the middle, like primary grades. So like in the earlier grades, that really needs the focus should be on exploration, and certainly that needs to be woven through as kids get older as well. Part of the reason we provided that example was a lot of people ask us, like, they really want to teach Canada's Food Guide, and so we have to come up with some creative ways that are a little more gentle. So, you know, making a collage of foods from the grain food doesn't even have to be whole grain. So it could be the grains, like all the different grain foods, or all the protein foods. That could be a more child-centered approach, and that's part of the reason why we provided that example. It's just that we get so many questions about, well, I want to teach the Canada's Food Guide, and really it should be about food, but this is just kind of a gentler way to do that.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, the new food guide also, it talks about how we eat and recognizing culture and tradition and taste and all these other things, and it has all kinds of recipes, and it's such this big, huge database, and the idea isn't that we're focusing on those elements as much anyway. So yeah, it's
And the Canada Food Guide also talks about the importance of eating together and cooking and all these things. So those are important aspects to also, you know, explore with children as well. Like I think a lot of times we get really stuck on just, you know, the Canada's Food Guide, the food groupings, and that there's it's so much more than that.
For sure.
Part of Kelly's idea was to, rather than like drawing a plate of like all the different components, was to read the picture book, The Beastly Feast, which sounds awesome. And children then design their own feast for their family, and it's inclusive of individual and cultural needs and practices, which sounds like a great suggestion.
The Beastly Feast, did you say?
Yeah.
Beastly Feast.
Oh, cool. I'm writing this down. See, this is awesome. We get to learn from you all too. It's so great.
Yeah.
I'm just like, this is so amazing.
Yeah.
And Kelly also says that to group foods like color or texture or animal foods or plant foods, and not necessarily what their nutrients are.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. We do ourselves a good service to do that. Absolutely.
And Stacy has a question here. That children are so influenced by what's popular to eat. Adults are often dismayed when food choices lean toward candy and chips. Are there any suggestions for supporting adults, like parents, teachers, volunteers, educators, in understanding and responding to encouraging children despite these choices?
That's a really great question. And I think we sort of mentioned the webinar that we did in January a couple of times, which really like explores that feeding relationship, and that there are jobs that adults can hold and jobs that children can hold. And if the adults are the ones who ideally are deciding what is offered and when and where, and if we can create that routine structure of meals and snacks with a variety of choices, and certainly that candy, you know, you have the control then that candy is not going to be offered at every meal every day, then they have the control over sort of how often foods like candy and chips and that kind of thing are offered, and then the child is the one who then decides from what is offered how much to eat. I don't know if that helps, but
yeah, and
Eddie,
just to add to that, yeah, just not making those foods forbidden foods, because like Nicole was saying, once we do that, children sort of zero in on them. They become preoccupied with those foods, and they tend to eat them more when they have the opportunity. And so I'm not sure for the folks on the line whether you are supporting younger children or older children, but if you are supporting children who are older, maybe in later high school, we can also start to think about teaching about media literacy and getting kids to think critically about food marketing and that sort of thing. Can be helpful.
absolutely.
So I have a personal question. So I was teaching a grade 6 class, and I found it really awkward as a teacher. Like as a parent, I can decide what my toddler gets to eat, but as a teacher, like they were eating Mr. Noodles and pizza pops every single day, and that was like the cool thing to eat. So it was really hard for me to say, like, I don't know, we had to limit like the times that they were eating, because like as a teacher you can't decide what they're eating, but how could you maybe not encourage it? So I don't know, it was just like this culture that it was cool. Like how do you get in their heads about it?
So that's a great question. I think part of it is just recognizing your locus of control, first of all, and you know, eating is really, really complex. And I mean, like we could start to think about how we can, what things that like we have control over in the school setting. So the types of foods that like we're making available to students, the learning opportunities, as opposed to, you know, telling them like, you know, not to eat a certain food, because oftentimes that's not going to support of the food acceptance skills that we want to build. I don't know, Nicole, if there's something else to add. I think our webinar in January does a really good job at sort of going into some of that more into detail.
Yeah, I think it's really about like, you know, if you can give them an opportunity to, I think Amelia, you already mentioned like the media literacy, or asking ourselves why, like exploring why we make the choices that we do. I mean, there are lesson plans out there that kind of explore that and the opportunity to take a look at our choices and how can we, what are some other options out there, and provide those opportunities for discussion about other foods and exploring them. That's really, all we can do.
And it's hard because it's shifting culture. If this was like prior to COVID, I would talk about, the power of salad bars. Like I've seen how kids are, clamoring out of the classrooms for salad bar days, and how powerful that can be, and shifting sort of culture and what's cool. We can role model healthy eating, and of course some of those things are going to be a little harder now, in the times that we are right now, but just thinking about how it can be more about opportunities as opposed to like using our words to tell kids that they need to choose these foods or not these foods.
Because it just doesn't work. You can't force it, right? You want to kind of inspire them, or how could you help out? These are youth, right? Like teenagers. Like how could you get in, like, I mean, Project Chef has these great ideas about ways to develop food skills, and can you get in the kitchen, and it doesn't have to be with any particular food, but the more we can get, generate an interest in getting in the kitchen, then the good nutrition follows. We have strong research that tells that. So if we can get them more involved in food altogether in any way, really, whatever way it seems interesting to them.
Yeah. We have some good suggestions here. We have like maybe making some healthy dips for pizza pockets, and like talking about maybe making a little healthy or adding coleslaw to the Mr. Noodles.
I love that. That really is in line with Ellen Satter's philosophy of the add on, don't take away. And that's a really good approach to take with nutrition education as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's like, what can you add to it so we can increase variety? And I think that variety message too is like, that really helps us get what we need. So how can we add more variety?
Helen Young says here that a lunch to go handout could be posted or made available to families, like positive food suggestions of foods that they can pack in a neutral way that parents might just run out of ideas. Like I'm sure parents are just like, you just send them with a bunch of Mr. Noodles and it's easy, but do you have any suggestions for how to engage with parents in a like respectful way, and like taking into consideration socioeconomic factors and cultural considerations?
I mean, for youth, or you mean all ages? So I think it's easier in the elementary years, and really as you're getting into those teen years, I think
K-6.
Yeah, I think with K-6, I mean, I think there are opportunities to sort of send like some of the resources that we shared on one of the last slides, that those are designed for families and meant to trying to be inclusive. And there's lots of great recipe ideas, and like Helen mentioned, the lunches to go handout, and there's lots of recipes on Better Together and the food guide. They're designed to be a little bit more affordable and available foods that are also nutritious. And as for the older years, really, it's about trying to inspire them through, providing food opportunities tied to the curriculum that can inspire them. Like even the parts of the plant, little exercise that one of those lesson plans I talked about. Get them like what parts of the plant do we eat? Can you find foods around your house that are parts of a plant? Have you ever eaten them before? Ask the questions. About the foods you want them to eat more of? Like, have you eaten them? How have you eaten them? What gets in the way of eating these foods? And have a challenge to repair something from those foods that you're hoping them to add more of.
Okay, I like that. And Melanie was wondering too that you could talk about like nutrition and how compare it to vaping, and like how do you feel? How, like, just because things are cool doesn't mean they're not harmful. And then what happens to your body when you regularly eat?
Asking them how they feel. That's a great. The difference with nutrition and vaping is that vaping, they can stop that behavior, but we don't stop eating. And as Amelia mentioned at the beginning, like, it's just so many reasons why we eat the foods that we do. So, ideally we're not saying like that's bad, you should stop eating that in the same way. Like, there's just more risk that way, of that lens. But I love that. Like, how does that make you feel? Like, what are other opportunities? Like, coming from a place of curiosity and inquiry, I think we just really hold ourselves in a much better position to make change in the long run.
That's really cool. Tanya says that she works with a First Nations school, K-7, and they struggle with with extreme picky eating, that it's really hard to figure out for kids to serve.
Yeah, so we have some really good resources on the Northern Health website. There's one called picky eaters are eaters in training. So if you want to take a look at the website, I don't know if Nicole, we shared a link, but
you know what, those resources are linked on the if you go into the webinar from January 28th, it's on the resource list that we shared. It's on Addie on your Farm to School webinars sort of list of webinars. And the other thing is we can add it in to the slides as well. It's a great one for sure.
Yeah, and with you know, children who may be more cautious with less adventurous, with more cautious with food, really is about they need more opportunities to explore and experience food, and there's lots of rich learning that can happen. Doesn't necessarily need to be foods that they eat. So it could be, you know, learning about foods and, like we said, where they grow, where they come from, touching them, smelling them, getting kids involved with growing, harvesting, cooking, even if they're not yet eating those foods. Those positive experiences over time will support to build the food acceptance skills. So yeah, just it takes a lot of patience and a lot of time. Learning to be a healthy, you know, to eat well is a process, and so we just need to be very patient and provide lots of opportunities for children.
Cool, thank you.
So I'm mindful of, sorry, I was going to say, I'm mindful of the time, so we probably need to wrap it up pretty soon, but I just wanted to share, share the one thing, sort of what has jumped out at people as well, just before
I'm going to the website.
Sorry?
I like that. I'm going to the website.
I'm going to the website. Oh, yay, thank you. We appreciate that. Definitely takes a lot of time to prepare, so we appreciate that. And oh my goodness, all the wonderful things that all these community partners and different organizations have put together. It's just, they do the hard work and then we are able to showcase it. So it's really, really amazing, all the work that everyone does.
I have one more suggestion here from Barb, that they did a parent evening at school with demonstrating different lunch and snack ideas. So it might be kind of nice to also, I like that idea of also exposing it to parents. And I mean, I think you can change the world by teaching kids to do things and then they bring it home, but it's nice to also engage with parents whenever there's parent nights or anything, that you could have those healthy snack options. And if the kids have prepared them for their parents, even better.
Amazing.
That's
not
awesome.
So much right now, but yes, outside of COVID, yes.
There will be a life after COVID.
Right?
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
And Stacy said that they use complete no pressure approach with Indigenous youth, and then asking them for food ideas and incorporating their own ideas, which sounds like a really great way to engage children.
So amazing to hear that that's working really well, because that's the thing. I mean, we can provide this theory, but to hear, hey, you know what, it works, is really incredible.
Awesome. Well, we've had a lot of wonderful. Thank you so much, Amelia and Nicole. That was so, I don't know, I'm really excited to go ahead and start thinking about how to reframe food, because it's really hard. Like, you have it from how you were taught about it and you have to relearn, and then but
It's so much unlearning, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so much unlearning. Yeah, for sure.
I just wanted to, oh, sorry. So there is your contact information on the screen there, both of your emails.
Yeah, and we'll keep that Menti open, so if anything else percolates, feel free to add it in there. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time with us. And if you do have any questions or feedback about the webinar, about the content, please don't hesitate to reach out. We really love hearing from you.
Awesome. Well, I am just going to share my own screen because I would like to let everybody know this works quite well from what we were just talking about, Indigenous youth and food. So our webinar next week is going to be about the local food to school program on Haida Gwaii. It's been going for several years, and they do amazing work with a lot of the local community partners. So they talk about how they are engaging community partnerships and not replicating programming, which is always a struggle, as we know, and the adaptations that they've made for COVID. So it'll be really helpful to anybody working with schools and their food programs. So that's next Wednesday from 3. It's either going to be 3 to 4 or 3:30 to 4:30. We haven't quite decided yet. So that'll be next week. You can register on Eventbrite again. And as always, we'd like you to stay in touch with us here at Farm to School BC. So you can sign up for your regional listserv or our monthly newsletter that's going out next week, and always on social media. We've been posting lots of resources on our Facebook page and our website as well. And we have Instagram and Twitter. So this is all of our animators for each of our regions. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with any one of us. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And I'm just going to stop sharing. And we're going to end right on time. So thank you everyone so much. And hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thank
Okay,
you, everyone.
bye guys.
Bye.